encourage, exterior improvements, either expansions or improvements to existing facilities. Then the tools are very valuable for those types of things. But we really have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But just to kind of summarize, we're really trying to look at being able to use TIF in this area primarily for commercial development. But we also want to try to preserve and enhance, to the extent that there are such properties included here, the residential stock as much as we can. And if we're successful in being able to do that with this area, then it could be later on we might look at some other areas. But we're really doing this, and we've been working closely with your school district in collaboration with the school, because they're interested in making sure there's families here living in Peoria Heights that have kids that go to school. So if we can do anything to keep those kids as well as try to attract more families, that's kind of what we want to do. So we're experimenting with that at this point, but we may be able to do more later. All right, Steve's got to move on here. That's the Trester's site that they're looking at. You're familiar with that. I'm not the expert on that project, but that big picture is a view from the back, of course. But I think it gives you the best overall view of that portion of the building that is anticipated for major renovations if that project comes to pass there. And then the whole front plaza area here, of course, this would all be renovated and redeveloped as well. It's really, it would be quite remarkable to see what could be done with that property. It's one that I know the community is proud of, or would be more proud of, to have a new business located there and preserve the history of that building at the same time. Okay, now we're looking at a second area also, which is down at War Memorial Drive. Now this area is on both sides of War Memorial, basically east of Wisconsin Avenue or Boulevard Avenue, and it includes the area right here is just east of Leonardo's. Okay, everyone knows where I'm talking about. And Leonardo's, interestingly, is in the city of Peoria. It's not in Peoria Heights. And so there is right here and right here, there's a couple of new buildings, newer buildings, okay? There's two that look like that. You know what I'm talking about. The one that's closest to Wisconsin Avenue is already occupied. Okay? It is, for the most part, finished. And our understanding from the county at this point is that it was more or less fully assessed, but the other building is unfinished, is not occupied, and there's a great deal of other property there yet to be developed. And so we're hoping that the TIF district, as I've described at this point, would be available then to help stimulate additional development on that site, as well as then look at some other perhaps underutilized properties that may be to the east. There is a little bit of residential area to the south. Again, nothing's going to be mandated on anyone to make any changes. We do not recommend, nor do we include in our TIF plans, the use of eminent domain, using the TIF as a basis for findings for an eminent domain case. So, we would not want to risk the 23 years of a TIF district on an eminent domain case, but that would be handled separately. So if that were to come to pass, so TIF is not going to change the zoning. Zoning is completely separate from the TIF district. The zoning is controlled, the land uses are controlled by the village. Okay, and so all the development that is being incentivized or encouraged in these areas is voluntary. We're trying to work with developers to try to attract those who want to invest in Peoria Heights. Obviously, the Alden property is included, but the focus up here is the underutilized or the older buildings just north of Alden's that could be the subject of some redevelopment, we hope in the near future.
How far up?
What's that?
How far up?
How far up what?
The goals, how far up are they going to go?
I don't know, and I don't have any idea when or anything at this point. But we know the potential is there, and, you know, they just did this building they have, they did 8 years ago, which is a great addition to your community. They continue to be as successful as they are. We're hoping that we can encourage them to do more, to do more with that property to the north. That would be a question for them. I don't represent them, and I don't know at this point. Okay, the last thing I want to cover with you, and we'll take some questions, is this is essentially the process that we're engaged in at this time. Our group was hired by the village in December. We undertook then a series of meetings with both the village and the school district to kind of work collaboratively to outline these areas that we looked at and the scope of the TIF districts at this point, as I just described them. So that took some time, and then on January the 20th, at a board meeting here, we asked the village to approve what's called an interested parties registry. And that is intended for individuals or companies or organizations that may not be residents of Peoria Heights or have property within either of these TIF district areas, but would like to be on the list or receive notices and mailings of any future public hearings. There'll be one coming up that we'll talk about in a second. Otherwise, all the taxpayers within the boundary areas that we looked at will receive notices of the public hearing that is right now slated for mid to late April. Okay. All the taxing districts will be notified. All of the residential addresses within 750 feet of both of these redevelopment project areas will receive a notice in the middle of the public hearing, and it'll be published twice in the newspaper before that public hearing occurs. And the statute requires that once we submit a qualification report for these TIF districts, then no less than 2 weeks later, then the board will set a date for that public hearing. And then we're required to wait 45 days until that public hearing can be held. And so during that time, we provide all these notices. We meet more with the overlapping taxing districts through what's called joint review board meetings, where we go through the plan and review with the representatives of the taxing districts what the village is intending to do, and we review the qualifications of the areas as well. And then after that public hearing, which if we stay with this timeline with the April 21st, it would be another couple of weeks, would be the earliest, around the first week or so in May, before the village would be able to actually establish these two TIF district areas. So there's still a considerable amount of work to be done and time before anything is finalized. So, all right, I need to stop and ask if there are questions or comments or concerns that any of you would like to talk about.
It's my understanding that will be the board that decides this, or will there be a vote?
The village board ultimately makes the final determination and establishes these areas. The municipality has the authority to create the TIF districts. You got a question?
So, in other words, I can come in and say, we're going to buy this property, we're buying it on top of that.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Not that, I can come in like I live in Illinois, I can come in, we're buying the whole property. Unfortunately, we don't have the policy.
I know of no intention or plan at this point for anything like that, and that would all be between you as a property owner and whoever wants to buy your property.
So there's nothing,
The plan is not going to dictate any kind of land acquisition or land use.
so go on here, okay. Well, I got to step out, unfortunately, but
Okay.
I didn't get the grocery from the main.
Oh, did we run out? I happen to have a couple extras.
Yeah, Steve.
Thank you.
Anyone else not? Other questions? carry them home. You have a question?
One of the things that you can do with the TIF funds, is there any mechanism, I don't know if there would even be a reason to do this, but to return that money to the taxing bodies instead, like say something that didn't get used, or what, how, or does it require that everything, all the TIF funds have to get used somehow? What happens to any funds that are remaining in a TIF if, say, a village or a municipality doesn't use the funds?
Well, there's multiple questions in your question.
Yes, there.
I will try to answer each one as best I can remember them, but the first one, which is the easiest for me to tackle, I won't go back there. You remember the chart? You have it in your pamphlet. 23 years, okay? At the end of the 23 years, okay, on December 31st of the 23rd year, if there are funds remaining in the TIF fund, then those would be declared as what we call surplus funds, and they're sent back to the county collector, the treasurer, and then they're redistributed to all the taxing districts based on their tax rates. Okay? So the fund would be cleaned out as of the end of the TIF district.
But the way it would be cleaned out was it would be distributed to taxing bodies as if they had actually taxed that property. I mean, the percentages.
Yes.
They would go out in
The
proportion.
balance of whatever's left
Of balance of what
would be redistributed back to the county and into the other taxing districts. There is not a requirement in the TIF Act that the municipalities spend out their TIF funds each year. Okay, so there can be funds accumulate in the TIF funds. And as I mentioned earlier, there'd be 3 different funds, right? Different one for different account for each TIF district. But there's no requirement that the funds be spent out every year. And the reason for that, really, I go back to the wisdom of the people that started this back in the mid-70s, was that you got to allow towns, especially smaller towns, to have an opportunity to let that fund grow a little bit in order to be able to provide the kinds of redevelopment programs that they may want to offer for, these commercial rehabs or for neighborhood redevelopment projects, low interest loans, grants, or whatever it may be. So if you can't let the money grow or accumulate to some extent and earmark it for that purpose at some point in the future, then it doesn't work very well. Did I get all of the?
I think so. In the meantime, there was some talk about, for example, the school district. I didn't say school district specifically, but any taxing body, is one of the things that the tax funds can be, the TIF fund, excellent, the TIF funds can be used for, is to then compensate certain other taxing districts for their.
Yes, it's a good question, and thank you for reminding me what that part of it was, from getting the whole thing. The other taxing districts the village can work with the other taxing districts to the extent that, they can incur costs that the village deems are important or in furtherance of the objectives of the TIF plan, okay? And one of the reasons we start our conversation always with the school district is because they're obviously the largest stakeholder on the tax bill, right? They're 50% of the bill or so, maybe a little more. And so if there's a taxing district that's going to perceive a direct impact of financially of the TIF district, it's probably going to be the school, okay, first of all. The next thing is that in order to attract good quality commercial development, as well as try to enhance opportunities for new residential development, probably an emphasis on the residential development, it's important for the school district to be strong. And so the village has a desire to work with the school district, to collaborate with the school to the extent that we possibly can in order to maintain your schools here as one of the big selling tools or one of the big assets for trying to attract new projects and new investment in the community. And so through that discussion, it really started back in December or so, the village and the school district has agreed already through intergovernmental agreements, a series of 3 intergovernmental agreements for each TIF district to do exactly what you're talking about. The monies that would be reimbursed back to the school district would be used for capital purposes, to maintain the buildings or to make capital repairs to the facilities. That's really the only limitation, I think, on the use of the funds. But to the extent that the village can reimburse a portion of that, it would be helpful. Right now, that's probably going to fall somewhere in the neighborhood of 15% or so of the real estate tax increment that's generated every year will likely be reimbursed to the school district. So on that graph, you have the orange part that's going up, that upper line. There'll be a portion that will come right off the top and be reimbursed back to the schools.
And you said that can be reimbursed to schools even if they are cut out of that TIF district by this reorganization?
Their facilities do not have to be within the TIF district boundary.
Okay, but other facilities, like
Yeah,
private
if the
facilities?
village enters into an agreement with the school, or at some point during the life of the TIF district, another taxing body makes application for some assistance, maybe the library will need some help with something, then they can enter into an intergovernmental agreement at that time. And the library is included, but it doesn't have to be. The taxing bodies that are the recipients of TIF funds through an intergovernmental agreement, like I described, can use it anywhere within their taxing district.
Oh, okay.
But it doesn't have to be spent within the
The TIF district, just as long as it's that district's area, not the TIF district.
That's right.
Okay.
Anyone else? Any other?
When you talk about residential, are you talking about apartment? Residential apartment, is that what you're trying to do?
No, not necessarily. I think what the primary goal is what we've discussed at this point would be more, as much to the extent we can, the type of housing that would encourage families, single-family type housing. So we'd like to see homes, or not so much apartments, but I think that the homes will help the village and the school district both achieve its goals better than any other kind of residential development. They're all here. I mean, they can speak to that better than I can, but that's my understanding of this. You had a question right behind you?
In the second TIF district that's outlined, that area is currently a highly residential area.
Part of it is.
So at the point that a developer, say a commercial developer, is interested in buying some of the property, at what point is the property rezoned from being residential to being commercial? And then, once it's zoned commercial, can there not be any houses in that area then?
I don't want to diminish the importance of your question, but that is not a TIF question, okay? That's a function of the village government and determining the land use and zoning for all this property. Whatever the TIF does is going to be subordinate to the then zoning ordinances, subdivision ordinances of the village. So I can't answer that question, but there would be a process if you were willing and wanted to sell your home for some purpose like that, then you can negotiate with whoever's trying to buy your property on your own. And whoever's buying it, for whatever purpose they're going to buy it, would need to come to the village and, check on the land use and zoning requirements at that time.
But the TIF is giving the businesses an incentive
To the extent they incur TIF eligible expenses, and the village board approves it. You have a question?
Yeah, how does this show up on the tax bills?
That's a great question, and everybody wants to know that.
Yes.
You would have noticed if you got one of the notices, and if you didn't get a notice, it was because you don't live or have property in the TIF district areas. Plus, the areas that we just looked at are a little bit different than the area that came with the notices, so there might be a little bit of fluctuation there. Those notices are up there. But on the front of those, we say that the tax increment financing district is not a taxing district. It isn't. So when you see it on your tax bill, you'll see the county and the community college and the school and the typically fire district and library, township. You go on down and you see Village of Peoria Heights, then you'll see perhaps Peoria Heights TIF 1 will be on there. But when you go across and you look at the bill, there's no rate. Okay? Because all the TIF is doing is it's reallocating a portion of the tax bill that would be paid anyway. And it relates back to that part of the assessed value that increased over and above the base year. So it isn't going to increase your, TIF isn't going to increase your taxes by virtue of creating a TIF district itself. What it does is it allocates a portion of your tax bill to the village's TIF fund to be used within these TIF areas. But there's no additional tax as a result of the TIF. Yes?
The area right on Marietta, I think Pat's might know that, I'm not sure the area there. Is that where you're talking about building the residential homes?
Yeah, and let me be clear,
My real question is it going to be a low income?
There's no proposal at this time
Okay.
to build any residential
On that
projects, okay? And as I said, the goal here would be to try to encourage the type of residential development that would be favorable for attracting families that will have kids that will attend school, okay? But at the same time, we want the type of development to occur within these areas that will increase the assessed value of the area. That's the goal of the TIF district. And so if we were to focus on subsidized housing, for example, that typically is not going to increase the value of the area from an assessment standpoint. So that would not be something that I'm aware of that we would be
There was a lot
targeting
of
for.
going around, there was going to be projects built on that. And I just,
Yeah.
I just,
No. When we continue with this process, there will be a written redevelopment plan. The plan hasn't been written yet. But when we come back, at this point, it would be in April, unless we get delayed or we're going to make changes to the areas, it'll be in April when we come back for a public hearing. It'll be much like this, except at that point, we'll have more detail with regard to what's actually in the plan and what the proposals are for the types of development. Right now, I'm really speaking more speculatively than anything else. In the
I
back?
want to apologize for being late also.
It's okay.
So what's the process for trying to get the proposed area expanded?
For adding additional property,
Yes.
you would need to talk to, whoops, is it either one that you're particularly interested in? I keep hitting the wrong buttons here. To the extent that additional area outside the boundary as it is right now qualifies, from a functional standpoint, it's not a problem to add it at this point, but as I said earlier, we're ready to move forward pretty quickly here. And once we get to the point where we're sending out all these mailings and these notices for public hearings, and we meet with the taxing districts again, we're not going to want to add anything at that point. I really should go down to the end here. I need a faster trigger on my presentation. Here. And you have this in your booklets, but once we've gotten past this joint board meeting where we've met with the taxing districts and we've reviewed all of the plan and the areas with the taxing bodies, and we actually asked the taxing districts for an advisory vote as to the qualification of the area, then we don't want to make it any bigger. Okay? Anytime throughout the whole process, we can make it smaller. We can take property out and make the boundaries smaller. But from a practical standpoint, really, once we get past the sending out the mailings here in early March, the village is not going to want to expand these areas at this time. That doesn't mean they couldn't be expanded later, and they could be amended at some point in the future. And from the standpoint of someone who's maybe on the just outside the boundary, but has property that they're thinking, well, maybe in 3 or 4 or 5 years, I may want to do something that TIF could help me with. then we can come back and revisit and do an amendment to the TIF area to add some property, even at that point. But I won't say that it's impossible to change the boundaries or add something at this point, but that would require more discussion with the village and out of, really out of respect for the collaborative discussion we've had at this point with the school district, we would want them involved as well. So I think, there would be some time that we'd have to extend this out, and that's not a decision that I make, that's a function of the village. So I'm just taking orders. So, but if after tonight you have some thoughts, there's some real compelling reason why some additional areas should be included, I would encourage you to talk to Matt, to talk to the village administrator about that. Okay? So it isn't too late, but we're getting close. In the back, I'll come back to you.
On the existing Lacey Paps TIF district, the reason that is not just being subsumed into TIF District 1 is because there's already funds in that Lacey Paps that are doing something, and so you don't want to shut down the TIF while it's in the middle. Is that why?
There are, quite frankly, the Cohen properties are generating some real estate tax increment now. And to the extent that that increment continues and is available in that remaining portion of that TIF district, because the Lacey Paps TIF district is contiguous with the new one that would be established, then the statute will allow the municipality to transfer funds back and forth between two contiguous TIF districts. Okay? So if it came to be necessary that a portion of that increment that's being generated currently could be utilized to stimulate something else in the new TIF district, that would be a possibility. But the more fundamental reason we're leaving that part intact is because in 2008, the village went through considerable effort and time to establish that TIF district for the purpose of, at least in part, redeveloping that property. So to the extent it is currently generating increment, we wouldn't want to throw that away, waste what the village had done in 2008.
Okay, it would clear out the fund if it got so.
It would end the fund, yes.
Okay.
And all of that. Anyone else? We're coming up on 6:30, but we got a couple minutes yet. Yes, sir.
I make just a comment.
Sure.